So as we go through, let's see if this remote control works. There we go. As I said earlier, we're using a bit of a different technology with Zoom. We're using the webinar function rather than the meeting function. You should see a bar on the bottom. It looks similar to this depending on what device you're using. The main function of this we're going to be utilizing is the Q&A. The chat function, you can ask questions directly of the panelists. However, the Q&A is probably the better place to do it. Other people can then see what questions have been asked already and may well be able to ask a follow-up question from it. We will try our best to get through all the questions today. Any that we don't get through, we will answer on a follow-up email to all of the people on the webinar. As I said earlier, we've got a hard cut-off of 9 o'clock, so it really depends on the volume of questions we get as to whether we can field all of them, but that's certainly our intention. So in terms of what we're going to try and do today, we're looking for the context for the introduction of the NHS Discharge Medicines Service, or DMS, why it's different to the service that many of you are already getting in your pharmacies through Tcams, and what you need to do and how it will change as a result. We're going to really break it down into the stages that are in there. So if you've not seen the toolkit already, we'll provide the link to it as part of the email that you'll get after the event. But certainly we'll go through the stages, so you should leave tonight with a clear understanding of how you can deliver that to your patients and in your pharmacies when you get there. We are going to talk about the benefits and why it's a good thing, what patients get out of it, what it prevents, and why they're introducing this service. And we are going to give you some hints and tips on how you can deliver and support patients with that service after the event. And all of this, the premise of it and why it's been introduced is really to support person-centered consultations with patients referred in through the hospitals to make sure that people's understanding of their medicines is solid. So what's new about it? So the service itself, it launches next week. It launches on the 15th of February. It becomes an essential service. So this means it's something that you have to deliver in your pharmacy. It's not optional. It's part of the core community pharmacy contractual framework. And it builds on the work that's already been happening in many areas around the country with Tcams or ETCP or Refer to Pharmacy or whatever of the other naming it's been given for it locally. We're in a really strong position across Cheshire and Merseyside. All of our hospitals have really engaged with the process. Not all of them are live yet, and we'll go through that in a second. However, compared to where the rest of the country are, we're in a really strong position. So we think this will be a service that launches well in Cheshire and Merseyside. And obviously, we're really confident that our pharmacies are engaged and wanting to do the best service they possibly can for the patients. What the premise of the service is the NHS trusts and the hospitals, they'll be referring patients who will benefit from more support with their medicines. And this includes trying to do a three-stage process, which we'll go through. One involving when you receive a discharge, the second one when the first prescription arrives, and the third one as an outcome from that in a conversation with the patient. The one thing I want to stress right from the off is the service is designed with a single payment for the service. So it's not designed to choose which steps you do. It's an essential service and it's designed to do all three stages. There is partial payments available if there's genuine reasons and the toolkit declares what they are, but you can't do all three. But the expectation from the off is that all three services, all three stages of that one service are delivered. So what it is, the aims for doing it and why it's been brought in, it's really been trying to bring everyone in touch with what decisions have been made around the patient. So if a hospital's choosing to stop a medicine or introduce a new medicine, it's making sure that that same message goes to the community pharmacy, that goes to the general practice, and that everyone who's involved has a visibility of that decision. The reason why that's really important is because there's a lot of harm that comes to patients through transfers of care and through those messages not being received in a timely fashion. And this is introducing another safety net to make sure that everyone involved sees that information, and it gives another opportunity for that to be acted upon and for an unintended consequence to be stopped. Building on that as well, it's improving patients' understanding at the point of discharge or the point of an appointment of care ending in a hospital. the patient's probably not in the right frame of mind to actually take in the information and to absorb all of that, and that will be contributing to any unforeseen errors that happen. What this service does is it allows to have the conversation further down the path when they're actually in their community pharmacy or in contact with their community pharmacy, generally when they're in a much better frame of mind to absorb information and they've got someone that knows them and is caring for them on a regular basis, that knows how that information needs to be pitched for that individual as well. The aim of it is to reduce hospital readmissions and stop people bouncing back in due to issues with their medicine. And really it's about that development of a bigger effective team working right the way across all of the disciplines, across hospital, community, general practice teams and the PCN pharmacist teams. And that will provide the clarity on who does what in the medicines change and the prescribing chain. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand across to Matt, who will talk us through the benefits of the service, and I'll put me on mute.
Thank you, Adam. Adam, are you clicking through the slides, or can you give me back control?
You should have control back now, Matt.
All right, tap. There we go, perfect. Clicking before anything was working. Okay, so Adam's just briefly touched on the rationale behind the Discharge Medicine Service. Now there are some clear benefits to everyone involved in this service, whether it's us as pharmacists and clinicians providing the service, and to patients and to the trust as well. We all know, because of Tcam and ETCP, whatever you want to call it, the referrals we've been having now through to pharmacy for the last 2.5 years it's been going on for now from certain trusts, we know that this can benefit patients. We've all had experiences and examples, I'm sure, that we have seen over the last 2.5 years, this has been going on for, whereby we have managed to help a patient because of the information we've received from a discharge. And this Discharge Medicine Service is really just an extension of what we're already doing and already have been doing across our patch, across Cheshire Merseyside. So as we all know through the Tcam stuff, changes to medicines on discharge can cause confusion. Patients can take the wrong medicines inadvertently or on purpose. Sometimes there's errors made when those in general practices are transcribing the discharge to the new medicines that they're about to prescribe. There can be communication problems. Some of the discharge summaries can be quite tricky to read. They can be hard to understand, and things can get missed. So we know that there's an increased risk of harm due to these changes, and we know that these can be avoided. And the stats in the colourful boxes underneath on the slide, are quite well documented stats now. So we know that 60% of patients have 3 or more medicines changes to the meds when they're in hospital. And then between 30 and 70% of patients do experience some form of unintentional change once they've been discharged through miscommunication, etc. Only 10% of patients will be discharged on the same meds that they were admitted on. And 20% of patients have been reported to experience adverse events within 3 weeks of discharge. And 60% of those could have been avoided. As we said before, the Tcam project that's been going across Cheshire Merseyside now for 2.5 years has been exemplary. We're a beacon across the country as to how many trusts are live. You should be in the best position in the entire country, pretty much, to make this successful in your pharmacies. Okay, you will already be receiving, on the whole, a number of referrals on a weekly basis, and this Discharge Medicine Service is just a different way as to how we go about doing something with that information. The slide here lists all of the trusts that are currently live. We've got all of the acute trusts in orange. We've also got 2 mental health trusts in blue. Now, the only 2 there is a slight question mark over is Leighton and Macclesfield. Now, I believe Macclesfield is live now, and I believe Leighton is going live extremely close. Can someone from the Cheshire patch just correct me, or?
That's correct. Macclesfield is live. The numbers aren't great at the moment, but they're building up. Leighton has been in test for some time now, and we're led to believe they will be live soon, but we don't have a date just yet.
So once those two are fully up and running, because we know from the other trusts that have gone live, it takes a bit of time for them to build up to significant numbers, but it might not take them long. So if you're down in the south of Cheshire, don't worry about that, okay? Because you should get some referrals pretty soon if you haven't had them already from other hospital trusts. With this new service, any trust in the country will be able to refer a patient to us. We're not just subject to the local trust. So if you're very close to a border with Greater Manchester or whatever south of Cheshire, then you should be getting some referrals from those hospitals as well. So the patient pathway is that there's a very clear three-pronged approach here between the community pharmacy, hospital, and the general practice. As some of you will have experienced through the Tcam referrals anyway, not all of the queries you may have about a discharge will need to be dealt with and resolved by the GP or the GP team. We have seen quite a few queries bouncing back to the hospitals for clarification rather than going to the GP as a conduit between the hospital and the community pharmacy through the Tcam work. And this will be a continuation of that. So the hospital will identify patients that they want to refer. We don't anticipate the referrals changing, so the patients you're already getting from the trust will pretty much stay the same, like the same patient cohorts, etc. And the hospitals and the pharmacies will work together to support safe discharge of patients. In the community pharmacy, there are 3 stages that are involved in the service, which we'll go on to in a minute for those of you who haven't read the toolkit yet. So there's a quick check just to review what's come through on the discharge. Are there any changes to what we were dispensing prior to admission? There's then a reconciliation when the next prescription comes through to make sure that the GP has made changes that are on the discharge, and then a consultation with the patient to check exactly what they're taking and how they are at taking it and whether there's any issues that need to be resolved. And then the next partner in this are our pharmacist colleagues in the primary care networks, I would suggest. Nearly all PCNs now have pharmacists that work for them who will be providing structured medication reviews and will be able to give us information about test results and whether patients have our blood for certain conditions, etc. And can change and prescribe medicines. So as I just alluded to in the previous slide, there are 3 steps to this service. So step 1, and we're going to go into these in detail, and when we talk about each step in turn, I will show you the farm outcomes template screenshot that we have, because let's face it, a Cheshire Merseyside evening wouldn't be the same without me showing you all of farm outcomes templates, would it? It's just what we do. So step 1 is the referral is received by the pharmacy, and you just check it off against what's on your PMR to see if there's any changes. The second step is a reconciliation against the first prescription that you receive. And then the third step is a checking of the patient's understanding of the new medicines regime, checking for side effects, any adverse drug reactions, etc., etc. A bit like a post-discharge MUR, but slightly different. Okay. Now, the full details of the process can be found on the PSNC website, and if you haven't already looked at the toolkit and/or the PSNC website, I would strongly recommend that you do so after this event, before Monday when the service goes live, so that you're completely up to date and up to speed with what you should be doing at each step. But I'll try and talk through now for you, okay? So step 1, this has to happen within 72 working hours of the referral being received. So it doesn't exclude things like weekends and bank holidays if you're open on those days. So if you're open Saturday, Sunday, bank holiday Monday, that's 72 hours, okay? And needs to be within that working time frame. That's an important thing that I picked out from the toolkit when I looked through that recently, okay? Basically, step 1, all you're doing is comparing the medicines pre and post-discharge. So having the discharge summary against your PMR and checking, are they the same? Are there any changes? Have there been any changes to the quantities of medicines, changes to the formulations, changes to dosages, changes to like the frequency of when the meds need to be administered, changes to how often the medicines should be prescribed. So are they asking for daily prescriptions for someone who's perhaps very suicidal, or weekly prescriptions, or what have you? any note on the discharge regarding reasons for the change, and to make sure that that has been highlighted in future stages, and to check that the patient's happy with that change when you get to speak to them. And whether there are any interactions between, you know, the medicines that are received on the discharge, which you'd hope the pharmacy team in hospital would have checked over, but just in case, we do get some discharge sent out where they haven't been through the pharmacy team, so they haven't had a clinical pharmacist check in the hospital. So it's still, you know, important that we as community pharmacists check to make sure the clinical appropriateness of the prescriptions, or the potential prescriptions we're getting through. Okay. Now, I will escape out of this. Now, if one of the LPC team can just shout if you can't see when I change my screen, I'd be grateful. I'll have to unshare and reshare my screen. Can you see that screen still, chaps?
It's still showing the PowerPoint.
Okay, fine.
That's good.
Right, okay, great, thank you. So this is hot off the press, only for your eyes in our patch, and through the magic of Cheshire Merseyside LPCs and having a nice sweet word with the heads of farm outcomes, we've managed to get correct as of 3 o'clock this afternoon service template for farm outcomes. Now, unfortunately, I can't click around and show it to you live because it's still in development, because the data set has just been released today fully. So there is an enrollment function. So we haven't seen the enrollment, you know, questions yet, but you can imagine it's very similar to flu, where you have to tick to say that you've read the specification and you provide the service as per the spec, etc. And there is a CPPE Declaration of Competence for this essential service as well, so it's very likely that it will be linked to that as well, but I'm not too sure on the detail on that, so maybe if anyone's got any questions that if anyone else does in the delegate team, then we can answer that as a Q&A later on. So you'd enroll yourself here through the usual flu enrollment function. So I suppose the first thing to say is, when you get a Tcam referral through, it will look the same. You can still click on the patient, you can still scroll down and see all the information, and then at the bottom there is that accept, complete or reject buttons. That has not changed, okay? Again, you should only be using the reject button if that's not one of your patients, or it's, you know, not a patient of you know, say you're a care home, you offer services to care homes, and it's not a patient you're expecting to, you know, to move to that home, and so you will be, you know, furnishing the prescriptions going forward. So complete now, accept, or reject. Then when you access the system to provide, you know, as if you were at the minute going to complete now, and then the information you put on at the end of the service as to what you've done with that patient, that is what's changed, okay? So this is what will happen, and what I'm showing you now is what you will see as if you currently click complete now once you get your Tcam referral, okay? So you'll see here that all of this information is the, you know, the information of the patient demographics, general practice details, and any changes to medicines and interactions and allergies, etc. And then, you know, we then, once you press complete now, get to the actual service as it is on Farm Outcomes, okay? Now, oddly, and I don't know the reason why they're asking this, the NHS have asked that, that as a minimum requirement, we inform them whether the hospital trusts are providing the information that they should be, okay? So that's what this first question up here is about. Was the minimum data set provided by the trust, yes or no? Now, the minimum data set is in the toolkit, and the bits that are in the minimum data set are going to be listed here, okay? So, and you can easily check because you can just scroll up the screen and just check, oh, yep, the patient details are there, and then are the medicines listed? Oh, yep, they're there as well, you know? So it's not going to be too onerous to check this list is all above in the information sent to the hospital, okay? If you tick yes, this section won't pop up. If you tick no, this section will pop up, unfortunately, I can't show you the bits that pop up and ping up when you tick different boxes. This is every single last question here, so you have to kind of bear with me, okay? So stage 1, the receipt of referral. So was stage 1 of DMS provided, yes or no? If no, why not? And it could be that the patient's referred to a different pharmacy, or they've decided between discharge and this stage in the discharge they want to use a different pharmacy. They may have moved to relatives to live with them, so they're out of area now. They may have gone to care home, etc., etc. So there will be some occasions where you can't provide this service, but if that's the case, then you tick no and the reason why. If you tick yes, it will ask you whether there's any issues or clinical actions identified. So going through the list of all the things I said before, which are all listed here, about quantities, formulations, dosages, interactions, etc. If there are any issues, you tick yes, you tick what's gone on with that, and you can write any notes in the notes section here. And then if there are any issues, have you discussed them with anybody else? And if so, who? So the general practice, the PCN pharmacist, or the hospital, or anybody else for that matter. Okay. Now, importantly, it asks whether any prescriptions in the supply chain, if there are any prescriptions that don't reflect the changes made on that discharge. Now, that's any prescriptions sat on your shelf still that hasn't been collected since before the admission. That's any prescriptions that might be on repeat dispensing that haven't yet dropped down into your inbox or floating on the spine waiting to come down. So just double check to make sure that they're not any RD patients and there's not a prescription that's going to come down the spine that's going to be incorrect, and that you haven't got any bags of drugs on the shelf for the patient ready to collect that may be incorrect now. And then finally, for this stage, it asks you, is the patient likely to continue to stage 2 and 3, or whether the patient's unlikely to continue the service. And in that case, service will complete at that point. Now, it's very unlikely that at this stage, stage 1, any patient's unlikely to continue to stage 2 and stage 3. I can't really think of reasons why that would happen. There's bound to be some out there, but I would say it'd be very few and far between that stage 1 wouldn't automatically go into stage 2. Now, if you're not ready to go on to stage 2 at this stage, because you haven't got to do all 3 stages at once, sometimes that will happen because the patients, they're ready to, we all know the Friday afternoon scenario where they've come to collect the medicines at 5 o'clock. You haven't got the new prescription yet, but you've got the discharge has just pinged through. So you could do some of the, all 3 at once. It's likely that stage 1 will happen, by itself, and then maybe stage 2 and stage 3 could happen together. You do a reconciliation and you speak to the patient at the same time, or the patient representative at the same time. It will depend on the situation for each patient, and not one consultation will be the same as another potentially with this. Okay, but it's just be worth knowing about. Now, if you're going to stop at this point here and not progress on stage 2 now, what you need to do is don't go to the bottom of the service and click save, because that will complete the whole thing. Okay. What you need to do is go to the top, and there's this new floppy disk, old school or what, partial save button that you tick, and that will save stage 1, but leave you to be able to amend stage 2 and stage 3 without affecting any claims. Okay. We are all going to click the bottom save. We're all going to do it. We all just need to accept that we're going to do that at some point by mistake. It will be a pain for you. If you do go to the bottom and press save without completing stages 2 and stages 3, you can go back in if you can find the provision and edit it to update the stage 2 and stage 3 records, but you will have to amend your claim, which we'll talk about later, on the NHS MYS portal. Okay, so if you press save at stage 1, it won't automatically know that you've done stages 2 and stage 3 on MYS, so you will need to go and update your figures on that before submission. Okay, so that's the run through of stage 1. Now let's just see. Can you see the screen with the slides on now?
Yes.
Well done. Oh. Okay, stage 2. So stage 2 is the reconciliation you do when the first prescription has come through from the GP. Now, it may not be a repeat prescription. So if they have sent an acute item, but you notice that the repeat slip's changed, or you can access summary care record and check, it hasn't got to be the full repeat prescription that you do this on, okay? This stage, a technician can do as well as a pharmacist. In stage 1, the very initial clinical check should be done by the pharmacist, but then the other steps can be completed by the technician, and then the very final kind of recce for old meds, etc., can be done by any member of the pharmacy team. Okay. Step 2 can be done by either a registered technician or a pharmacist. Okay. So pharmacists, if you've got technicians there, use their skills to help the workload. Don't be trying to do this all yourself. You can share the love and do it between yourself and your technician. That would be great. It would be good for them to do something other than dispense, and it'll give you some time to do other stuff so you're not wrapped up in this too much, okay? The reconciliation happens when you get the first prescription through. So basically, you're ensuring that that prescription that comes through matches what the discharge said, to make sure that whoever's done the reconciliation and the transcription of the changes in the general practice has made the correct changes. Okay. Now, if there are any discrepancies or any other issues, ideally you try and resolve that with the general practice, probably through your PCN pharmacist. This would be a great time, if you don't know who they are, to find out who your PCN pharmacists are and when they're in the practices that you link with, because they will be able to do things for you, probably a lot more quickly than a GP could. Now, the toolkit will say that you need to make appropriate notes on the PMR and or other appropriate records. The and or other appropriate records is farm outcomes. So you haven't got to put everything in farm outcomes to do your payment and then write it chapter and verse in your PMR. Some of you may wish to do that, and that's fine, but the record in farm outcomes should be sufficient. However, you will need to think of how to flag to yourselves in the pharmacies that this patient is part of the Discharge Medicines Service and needs reconciliation and needs the consultation in step 3. So we'll discuss that more in a minute, but that does need to be thought of. Oops. So in step 2, let me just bring you back to farm outcomes. Shout if you can't see the farm outcomes template. I take silence to be good.
It's working well.
Perfect. So you might be thinking, well, how am I going to find this patient in farm outcomes in order to complete stage 2? What will happen is on the services tab in farm outcomes, we know that at the very top of the service screen, you get new referrals. Then underneath it, you get a provision history of the services you provided. Well, now there will be an in-between step. So you'll have the new referrals at the top, and beneath that will be partially completed templates. So any patient that you've not completed the DMS for on from outcomes will be hovering in that second bit underneath the new referrals. And then beneath that is the provision history for any other services you provided on farm outcomes. You click on the patient and then it will tell you which stage you're at, because one of these boxes at the top, where are we? These are FFSS0. The F will be highlighted if you've got to go to the F. I think that's first stage. You would click on this. This will be a circle, okay, purple circle. You'll click on that and it will take you straight down to the step that you should be at, basically, okay? So the first question, was stage 2 completed, yes or no? If you click no, then these reasons appear. So is the patient deceased? Have they been readmitted? Have they withdrawn consent to participate? Or have they gone to a different pharmacy? If you tick yes, it will ask whether it's been completed by the pharmacist or the technician. Were there any issues, yes or no? So if no, that's it, job done. If there are issues, you tick yes, and then you tick all of these that apply. So whether the medicines have been stopped in hospital, are on the prescription still, whether the wrong medicine's been issued on the first prescription, whether the wrong strength of medicine is prescribed, a bit bigger actually, there we go. The wrong doses, wrong formulations, items on the discharge that are missing from the first prescription, or there's been a new medicine initiated in primary care since the discharge. Okay, and then I'll ask you who you've identified those and discussed those issues with, and you tick. And then there's a space there for any notes. Importantly, don't be including any patient data. Now, at this point, you tick whether the patient is likely to continue to stage 3 or whether they're unlikely to. Now, the reason why they would be unlikely to continue to stage 3 is if the patient doesn't consent, basically, to you completing the consultation with them at the end. Okay, so hopefully the majority of patients will, and they will continue to stage 3. So you tick the patient likely to continue to stage 3, and then, as from before, you scroll to the top and you tick the partial save floppy disk. Don't go down to the bottom and press save, because that will end it. Obviously, if they're not progressing to stage 3, then you can go to the bottom and press save, because that's the end, okay, for that particular patient. Back to the slides.
That's showing, just to come in really quickly, those buttons on the demo we saw today, they were automatically at the top of your screen. So whenever you were scrolling up and down the service, they stayed glued to the top. So you won't need to be up and down and up and down. It'll work a lot slicker than that.
It's unfortunate that we've got to show you a PDF of the template rather than the template live, because it would make much more sense if you see it actually live. You all know how form outcomes work, so hopefully it makes sense. But you know, and we are where we are with it. Unfortunately, we're just very grateful that we can actually get this to work today, because we didn't know that we could do this until this afternoon. Okay, so step 3 is when the pharmacy team, now this can be again the technician and or the pharmacist, and I think this is actually quite exciting for techs, because they wouldn't necessarily, well, they haven't before now in a commissioned national service to do any of this, you know, patient consultation stuff. So I think it's a great, you know, step for the technicians amongst us. Step 3 is a checking of the patient's understanding of their new medicines regime. Okay, so there needs to be a confidential discussion. That hasn't got to be face-to-face with the patient. It could be with the carer, and it could be, if needed, over the phone or on a video conference facility. Okay, so in this new COVID world, the NHS have been quite, you know, open to how this happens and to who this happens with. And this is important, I think, because, you know, post-discharge MURs fell down, I think, because of a lot of the time it would be the carer, like the spouse or the child of the patient, who was dealing with, you know, the medicines and didn't know what they were doing and needed help and advice, while the patient themselves were convalescing at home. At least now there should be a way for you to get through to the patient, because they're not going to be able to come and see you face to face necessarily if they're, you know, convalescing. But also importantly, for the carers to get their head around what's going on as well is equally important, I think, in this situation. And, you know, we've all more than likely had the situations where we've had, you know, relatives bringing in bags of stuff going, what am I doing? You know, and this will help with that. It goes without saying, if the patient or relative is seen face to face, then you must use the consultation room, because the conversation cannot be able to be overheard. Any information that you feel should be communicated with the general practice, either with the GP or the practice pharmacist, should be communicated. There should be an offer as part of this step to return any old meds for destruction and disposal. All the notes can be made on form outcomes, but then also, you know, in the PMR if needed as well for future dispensing. You know, you need to make yourself notes for, you know, the patient needs, you know, this formulation rather than that formulation, or they need, you know, ease open tops or whatever else. And because this is an essential service, unlike the scenario that we had with post-discharge MURs and NMS, you can offer NMS as part of the CPCF. So the CPCF in this instance being the Community Pharmacy Contractual Framework. Don't be confusing that with CPCS, the Community Pharmacist Consultation Service. They're two very different things, okay? So just make sure you get your acronyms right here. Part of the framework and the pharmacy contract, don't be getting this confused with CPCS, okay? So I think new medicine service with, this patient understanding would be, very, very useful and benefit lots of the patients there. Right, let's go back to the template. Just holler. I'm going to assume you can see this. Holler if you can't. So again, you'll go into Farm Outcomes. You'll go onto the service screen. You will tick. You'll go to the section underneath New Referrals, and you'll find this patient. Tick on them, and you will then be taken straight to the stage 3. Question 1, has stage 3 been provided? Yes or no? What was the type of consultation? If the answer is yes, so was it in the pharmacy? Was it telephone, video, or home visit? And who was it completed by? If it wasn't completed, what was the reason? Same as above in stage 2. And if it was completed, were all the changes understood by the patient and the carer? Was there advice provided on the new medicines regime and any questions answered? And was there any CPCF, pharmacy contract services provided, such as NMS or disposal of medicines or signposting, healthy lifestyle advice, etc. And based on the consultation, if you have concerns that following the consultation, the patient really doesn't, or the carer doesn't understand what's going on, they're really not sure of the new regime and why they're taking these different medicines, and you're not convinced that your consultation has answered the patient's queries, then you can refer them on to the general practice. And when you press save at the end, the referral will be sent through to the GP, stating any concerns and issues that you've got. But again, as in with the Tcams that we're getting now, it might be worth, if you've got other communication means, to get in contact with the PCN pharmacist or practice pharmacist to do that, rather than rely on a referral maybe getting misplaced within the general practice setting. PCN pharmacists will be able to provide a structured medication review on these patients if you feel that they're still going to struggle and they need some further support. So you can refer into that service as part of step 3. If you're going to refer into the GP practice, consent needs to be gained for that information transfer to happen. So in order for that GP referral to be sent, they need to consent to share. If they don't consent to share, then pressing save will not send any information through to the general practice. While we're here, so that would be the end. At that point, you would press save, job done, and that's that patient journey completed. If at any point through this process, the patient changes pharmacy, so you might have done step 1, but then the patient's moved into residential care home, or they've gone to live with relatives and they've changed area, therefore changed pharmacies, you can send an onward referral to the next pharmacy. Okay, and if you click on the yes here for the onward referral button, and the patient's given you consent to share with the new pharmacy, you start typing the name of the pharmacy you want to refer to, usually kind of name, address, etc. You could try F code if you've got the F code, or the postcode. And what that will do is it will send a PDF of what you've done so far to the new pharmacy's NHS Net address. So it won't go straight through Farm Outcomes, and it won't show up as a Tcam referral in the new pharmacy's inbox in Farm Outcomes, but it will send an email to the NHS Net address. Okay. if you're on receipt, so you're pharmacy B and you're receiving the referral from pharmacy A because of any of the reasons you just discussed, there will be a template for you to go in and manually complete the record and from outcomes. It won't be the click-through sort of service that we have just demonstrated to you from the referral onwards, because you haven't had the original referral. So you'll need to input patient details and then kind of start from whatever step that you're starting from, okay? But that will then link to MIS to make sure you get the right payments, etc. So let's just go back to slides. Okay, so you need, as part of the process, to work out in your pharmacy how you're going to manage this and how you're going to flag that this patient is part of the Discharge Medicines Service and you need to do steps 2 and steps 3 with them. How are you going to flag to the team, to locums, whoever else that might be in the pharmacy on the day that you're not in, or on a day, you know, if stage 1 happens and you get the referral on the day that you're not in, how do you know that you then follow them up on the next day or whenever the next script comes through? Will that be, like this slide suggests, a paper form that you can kind of write the patient's name down and tick? If your PMR allows, will you kind of make a flash note to pop up to highlight to any dispenser or pharmacist or anyone that's going on the PMR that this patient is part of the Discharge Medicine Service and they're at step 1 or they're at step 2, and you know you need to collar them when they come and collect their prescription for step 3. You know, those sorts of things need to be ironed out, and you know their ideas. You know, you could have flash notes, you could have paper forms. You've all got different PMR providers. Have they got any solutions for you? Have they made any developments since this has all come out to make any changes to your systems? Knowing them, I doubt it, but you never know. There might be some changes. You know, ask them, especially if you're an independent, because no doubt the multiples have asked their providers. So if you're independents, the more people that ask, can you, you know, are there any updates to the PMR system so that it makes my life easier? And the more people that are asking, you know, potentially the higher up the queue of the things on their to-do list that goes, you know, so that they might make some changes. But for now, what have you got that you can do to make sure that you don't miss patients through these stages? Because as we said at the start, as Adam said at the start, the overwhelming majority of the time, all 3 stages should be completed. It shouldn't just be a case of doing stage 1 for everybody and very rarely ever doing a stage 2 and never doing a stage 3. The aim should be to get to stage 3 for every single patient. If you want a paper form, then contact your LPC and we can supply something like this to you to use. Or if you need any more help and advice to talk through with us how you might work that in your pharmacy, then please feel free to get in contact.
Matt, we're still looking at the farm outcomes screen. I don't know if we should be looking at the
Oh,
slides.
are you? Oh, that's useful to know. Hang on then.
Sorry, I was answering questions. I forgot to come in.
There's that bad boy. Can you see the form now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
So all of what I just said, when that makes sense, now you've seen this form. So, you know, this is a form where you can write the data referral, the patient's name, details, and just tick off when they've done what stage, you know where they're up to. You will also see, by logging onto farm outcomes, which patients are at what stage and which patients you still have to complete the record for. So, you know, there will be various ways that you can do it. For me, I would be looking to do flash notes if I could in the pharmacy on the PMR system, so you know which stage the patient's up to on what date, so you can find them easily in the farm outcomes tab. Others that won't be able to do, so a form will be better. You know, you'll all find your own solutions. There are probably other solutions out there that we haven't thought of. Fill your boots for whatever's going to work best for you, basically, okay? So, from the 15th February, any new Tcam referral that you get, you will see that at the end of the initial patient information, it will change. So rather than the current, what did you do, Tcam kind of follow-up stage, it will be replaced with what I've just shown you, okay? So that will come on board in the early hours of Monday. So from Monday, any Tcams you get through, you provide the service for. Sunday and before, you don't, okay? Now, these slides are on before we actually showed you the templates. Let me just check to make sure that nothing else needs to be discussed on these slides. I think that was all covered. There will be, it's worth mentioning now, a help video on farm outcomes that will be live within the next, well, by the end of next week, they've said. It should have been filmed today, but for whatever reason that didn't happen. So they are filming a guided video for pharmacy teams to look at. So please, when it comes out on the help tab on farm outcomes, have a look. Funding. So every pharmacy is going to get paid 400 quid automatically on the 1st of April to cover any training and time taken to produce SOPs, etc. No doubt if you're part of a multiple, they will be sharing their SOP with you in due course if they haven't done so already. And for any independent pharmacies out there, I know the NPA has already produced one. If you're members of Avicenna or Newmark, I don't know whether they have yet. I haven't checked myself, but just have a look with any membership bodies you belong to see whether there are any SOPs out there that you can copy and adopt into your pharmacy. The full service fee is £35. So that's for stage 1, 2, and 3. But as you can see, if on the off chance you can't provide all 3 services or stages of the service, then stage 1 attracts £12, stage 2, 11, and stage 3, 12 as well. Okay, and as I've stressed, all 3 stages must be completed unless there's an absolute exceptional circumstance, like the patients move pharmacies, or they've unfortunately passed away, or they've been readmitted, or as for stage 3, they do not consent to having that consultation with a member of the pharmacy staff, okay? Farm outcomes will talk to MYS, so it'll upload all of your data to MYS for you. The only way it won't do that is when, because it will be when, we all know it, you go and press save at the bottom without completing all 3 steps, okay? So if you save at step 1 or step 2, you will need to go and update your MYS figure for step 3 to make sure you get paid the final £12 for that patient. So it's really important you click that floppy disk partial save until you're ready to fully submit, and then MYS will be populated up, loaded onto MYS for you, okay? All of the data set that you have to submit to the NHS, so with the MUR NMS returns, you got to say how many patients you gave, health living advice to, exercise advice to, how many have got a better understanding of medicines, and all things like that. We haven't got to fill out a spreadsheet and submit it now to NHS England. That will be captured as a pull from outcomes. That's why we haven't got the full template to show you, because the data set has only been agreed today. So you haven't, that will do all the information pull for you. So, I wouldn't understand why, given we've got all this great Tcam referral through farm outcomes going on in our patch, why you'd want to do it a different way and work out your own solution manually or however else to record all this. Using it on farm outcomes will save you time in the end, because you will get all the data set you need to be sent to the NHS, and you will get the appropriate payment through MIS as well. So next steps. Read the specification, which I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it's not published yet. I have read the spec and the toolkit because I helped develop it, but the NHS haven't yet published the specification, so that's still outstanding. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the specification, there's guidance out there available. The toolkit's there. The toolkit is really good at explaining what to do when in each process. It's got a little to-do lists and checklists to make sure that every stage is completed properly, and checklists of what you need to do to help get yourself ready for this service. Don't forget, this goes live on Monday, so you've only got a few days to get yourself sorted, okay? You need to complete the Declaration of Competence, and complete the CPPE training. I have heard on the grapevine that it's not the easiest CPPE to pass, so give yourself time to pass it and stuff like that. Make sure you've got your SOPs in place. Virtual outcomes, you've all got access to virtual outcomes training through the LPCs and NHS England locally. They have developed a very good webinar interface for the whole of the pharmacy team, so the whole team understands what this new service is, because it could well be that non-techs and pharmacists that are seeing the farm alarm flashing or seeing the email in the inbox that you've got a referral waiting for you, logging into Farm Outcomes and highlighting to the pharmacist or the clinician that you've got a referral there. So it's important that the whole team are brought in on this, okay? And in the toolkit, if you read it, it does mention it's not a toolkit just for community pharmacists and pharmacy teams. It's a toolkit for hospital teams and general practice PCN teams as well, to give them kind of some food for thought as to how to manage this, because they will start seeing some more conversations, referrals going from community pharmacy into the general practice teams. So, speak to local practices, and if you've got links with the network pharmacists, make sure they know this is going live on Monday, and that they might well be getting some, some referrals and some noise through about it. Allocate some roles in your pharmacy. Whose responsibility is it going to be to check, and how often are they going to check whether the referral's there? Who's going to, check the shelves for old meds and check on the spine for any EERDs that haven't come through yet? Is it going to be the pharmacist does everything? If you've got clinicians, have they done the training? Can they be doing some of this to alleviate workload and to upskill themselves into doing something new? There are loads of checklists on the PSSC website, the implementation checklist, that would be very useful to tick through. And just get your heads around how you're going to manage the process in your pharmacy. Who's going to be highlighting it? How is it going to be done? Who's going to be doing each stage? How are you going to note on PMRs or how through any other means how which patients are part of the service and which patients need to be reconciled at stage 2 and which are waiting at the consultation at stage 3? Have those thoughts now ready for Monday if you haven't done so already. Hints and tips really for getting ready is just use the existing training and resources that we've got out there. Make sure everyone's got access to Farm Outcomes. Don't be leaving it to like next Monday to realize that for some unknown reason you haven't had to provide any services on Farm Outcomes in the last however many months, and therefore you've not got login details, or the classic, your manager's left and nobody else in the whole entire universe knew the access details for Farm Outcomes, so no one can get on to access any services to provide. Make sure that that's all ironed out. Make sure all the relevant staff can access summary care record, and make sure your NHS mail is working so that you can onward refer if need to, and accept referrals if another pharmacy has already started the process. Utilize the skill mix in your team. Don't, pharmacists, I speak as one myself, be trying to do all this yourself. You're busy enough, you've got a team there, the team are also busy enough, granted, but share the workload, get the team engaged and empowered to do stuff. It will increase their job satisfaction as well, because they're doing something different to what they're used to doing. Ensure that you know the patients who are who you deliver to, who you never see, but who sometimes daughter pops in to ask questions or ring up if they've got concerns. So identify those people for patients without capacity, and make sure that you cover the capacity sections of the training, to make sure that you're covered when it comes to discussing with carers for patients who lack capacity. as we said, decide how you're going to flag patients on the PMR, etc. Ensure that any ERD prescriptions have been updated following the discharge, and try, if you haven't, get those named links with the PCN pharmacists and practice pharmacists in your GP practices, who can sort you out and support you with prescription queries. Okay, this is a list of all the resources. I take it, Adam, that the slides will be made available to the delegates afterwards. They've got a link of all this. But if you're stuck to find information, check the LPC bulletins that we're sending out on a weekly basis to you, check the PSNC website, and there's links to all of the NHS England guidance toolkit, etc. on there. And make sure you haven't done so already, do your CPP learning modules. And now I'll hand you back to Adam for the Q&A session.
Thanks, Matt. So for those people who haven't found it already, there should be a Q&A button on the bar, either at the top or the bottom of your device, depending whether you're on Android, iPad, or computer. What I'm going to do, because we have been seeing a number of questions come through, I'm just going to very quickly go through a bit of a summary of them. Some of the answers the team have been doing as we've been going through. Just first things first, the slides from tonight, along with the checklist that Matt showcased to you, the link to this session as a recording, as well as an audio link to the podcast, they will go out and they'll come out via your normal LPCs. It's all dependent on the upload speeds that we get, so it might take us a day or so to get them up, but as soon as we can do, we'll get them out to you. There's been a few queries and questions around why is it an essential service. It's an essential service because that's what the commissioners have commissioned it as, very bluntly. There would be a big risk if it wasn't operated by all pharmacies, in that if a hospital sent the information out and expected an action to be taken, if that wasn't an essential service, that might not happen. So that's why it's been commissioned as such. We've had a brief with Pharm Outcomes today. They are in talks and they're willing to talk to any PMR provider. So really it's up to the PMR companies to have that conversation with Pharm Outcomes about having the link in so that information flows itself. There will be also a way to manually enter data in if it comes through a different route. If some hospitals, instead of using the Pharm Outcomes direct link, you send it in a separate way through NHS Mail or so on, there will be another template for you to enter information on in a very similar way to what Matt was saying about changing in pharmacies and being able to put that on. Obviously, all hospitals in Cheshire and Mersey, we have access to the Pharm Outcomes license, but like again, it might well be for hospitals outside of that. In the toolkit, it gets a little bit confusing when it talks about SCR as well as PMR as the access for your data. Just want to stress that if you do need to access the summary care record, you still will need to get patient consent. There is no implied consent from this service, other than the fact that the patient's consented for the information to be sent to you as a pharmacy. It doesn't then give you implied consent to access SCR. So if you do need to do that, which primarily I think will be for where patients have moved locations and they're in pharmacies that are naive to them, I think that would be where you would need to go and get consent and to view on SCR. Most of the time you are checking against your PMR records for patients that are known to you. There's been a few comments around GPs. The GPs have been briefed. It's gone out through the CCGs at a local level. There is a GP briefing in part of the toolkit, which is linked for the slide. So if a GP is genuinely saying they know nothing about it, you can point them to that link on the toolkit for them to find out more about it. But they should have received it from their CCG as well as the BMA. We're distributing it through the GP arm of the BMA. What else has been asked? Let me very quickly go through. There was a question around if the first prescription doesn't contain any of the new items, should we chase the information? And yet that's the nature of the stage 2 of the service, is to find out why it's not the case. Have the GPs actually actioned it, or is it still sat on a workload? And to make sure that any necessary changes are there. The GPs are the prescribers in that point. So if they come back to you and they say, no, I've taken a look at the discharge and I've made a clinical decision to do this instead, then that's okay, that's within it. But that's why you need to contact them to make sure they've picked up. There was a question around timing. Stage 1 should be actioned after 72 hours. It's an essential service, so that's within your contractual framework. So if you don't do that, technically you are breaching your contract. However, obviously, if it gets to that point and you haven't done it, it's still better to do it as soon as you possibly can, and to make sure that you do best by the patient for that reason. You know, the information's been sent to you for a valid reason. Just be aware that NHSE, obviously, as commissioners of the service, will get to see the timelines and the timestamps of it. So it does need something. Part of the preparation payment is to make sure that in your pharmacy you set up systems that can action it within 72 hours of your pharmacy opening it. I think there's a couple of questions around, will Pharm Outcomes be able to provide PDFs? We know the discharge is sent to Pharm Outcomes, and you can obviously print that discharge as a PDF and send it through NHS Mail. We think there will be an export function, but that's not confirmed at this stage, so we'll send that out once we get it. If a pharmacy, if you do end up sending the discharge notes to a new pharmacy, how they will know which pharmacy it's come from is because that will be on the top of the export from Pharm Outcomes, and it will also come through their NHS Mail, so we'll be able to get that. There's a link to Pharm Alarm on the questions, because there was a question around, is it still going? Yes, it is, to great effect, and the Pharm Alarm app website is there, and we'll make sure we put that on the slides as well before we send them out. What else has been on there? There's a query around whether Pharm Outcomes data and NYS, if there's a discrepancy. The purpose of contractors having to log into NYS is to confirm the information that's on there. So if there is a discrepancy, when you do that login, you'll be able to amend it appropriately. So yes, you should be able to do that. The toolkit you'll have a link for. There was a query around one trust sending referrals but without the discharge information. If you can confirm that trust to your LPC on the contacts that that you'll already have, we'll make sure that's escalated. The trusts are being encouraged and incentivized to do this, so there will be some cajoling for the trusts and making sure they do this. That will take time, however, particularly for those that aren't live already. And I think there'll be a bit of a ramp up in activity. So it will start with the activity you're already used to. I would imagine that will be growing, and we'll do our best to inform you as you go through. There was a question around area manager logins. There was a couple of questions around area manager logins and management information on Pharm Outcomes. And if you already get that sort of information about other services, then it's capable. That's a question between you and Pharm Outcomes themselves in terms of what services they offer you over and above what's been commissioned for this service. There was a follow-up from whether the hospitals will query every change. I think you'd only query ones that aren't clinically appropriate. You know, if a patient's been discharged and the note is saying there are changes to your PMR, it's really for you to make note of those. It's not for you to query every single one of them. So they will be relevant, and it would only be if a subsequent prescription issued by the general practice is different to that. That's when you would do the queries. You wouldn't be going back for every single change to the hospitals, because that's not the purpose of it. So it's only if there's discrepancies with the discharge letter and then take home and so on and so forth. Timelines for stage 2 and stage 3 was queried. There's not a set timeline because you don't know when the first prescription is going to arrive. You would normally expect most people to be discharged with at least 14 days of medication. But the defined element is when the first prescription arrives with you. There's a couple of questions still opened on there around SCR records updated automatically. Would any of the panelists like to pick up those questions? No. Okay, so SCR.
I'm trying to read which ones you're on about, Adam. Sorry.
So if you're on the question as a panelist, you should see the open ones. So there's one from Hannah. Helen would like to answer it live, so I will type while you talk, Helen, if you come off mute.
Let me unmute. Am I unmuted now?
You're off now.
Okay,
We can hear you.
in terms of summary care records, what you tend to see certainly on the GP systems is that they will have summary care records flagging up, and the GP practices staff can actually tick to say they want to send those. So they should actually be ordered, but they don't automatically update if the clinician isn't using smart card. So that's the reason why another clinician may go in. And sometimes, as I say, you will see there are summary care records for patients that have been updated. Do you want to send? And usually another clinician will go in and click send. So that's essentially the answer to that one.
Sorry, Adam, I'll take the one about it's only in England. The service is currently only in our contract for England.
Brill, thank you. So only in England for that one.
So I suppose the question is, if there's a visitor from Scotland that comes to visit a relative in England, does it still apply and do we claim for it? Well, if the visitor from Scotland gets admitted to an English hospital and they're going to be staying in England recuperating, then you might get a discharge information for that patient who's not one of your regular patients. So it's a possibility, especially in our neck of the woods with Wales being so close, potentially. If they end up in the County of Chester, or even in the Royal or somewhere else, close to Wales, there is a chance that we could get a referral for a Welsh or non-English residing patient. You might not be able to complete all 3 stages because they might only be in the area for a week or 2. So you can, but if you get a referral, then you're essentially contractually obligated to do something about it.
There was a couple of questions that have gone through around what do you do about existing Tcam referrals if they've not already been cleared off. You can't convert existing Tcams referrals into the Discharge Medicines Service. It's only going to be referrals once the service is live that are able to go in. And that's just because of the nature of the data set that Matt was talking about and making sure it flows into the right place, particularly within Farm Outcomes, but also through the other referral routes, NHS Mail and whatever other systems that are live up and down the country. If you do have existing Tcams, you don't necessarily need to wipe them off to make things clear, but it might well help if there haven't already been actions taken from them. Just make sure they've done it so they don't already appear as in the workflow. That would be an entirely sensible thing, but please don't wipe them off. Please do take the information that you need off it first.
There's also quite a few questions on that, Adam, about won't be GPs annoyed if I'm contacting them all the time and all things like this. Get over the GPs. GPs now have a multidisciplinary team full of pharmacists to do that work for them. You won't be contacting the GP, you'll be contacting the PCN pharmacist. Get the contacts if you don't know who they are, because they're going to be really crucial for this service to work properly in your areas. You're not going to be annoying GPs because you're going to be having professional conversations with the practice and PCN pharmacists.
Can I just say something on behalf of Sefton? We have a hub. We have the hubs in Sefton, and it does say in the toolkit, because it might not be the PCN pharmacist. It might be that you can go to the hub to sort any issues. And I have contacted our CCG to confirm that where they'd like us to sort of escalate any issues. And I'm just waiting for a reply on that. So I will update our Sefton contractors.
It's also worth checking to see if there's any consultation on the system. So if you do speak to the GP practice and you're not speaking, you're speaking to maybe one of the reception team or the prescription clerk, ask them, if you've got an issue, ask them if when the discharge letter came through, if there's a consultation on there about the discharge letter, because in certain areas now that's actually happening. So they might be able to clarify the information quite quickly in that way, or they might know which clinician actually to go and ask the question or your query to. So that's a useful question to ask.
Well, there's a couple of things I wanted to comment on in terms of will Tcam run alongside or DMS. All discharge notes will go into this Discharge Medicines Service. There will be some element of Tcams in terms of if your hospital trust does admissions notices, which I know a couple of them do, they will still continue, and they're not a discharge referral. They're a separate thing, so you will still get those if you get them already. The other thing, I think there was a question that it's vanished on my screen, so I'm sorry to ask that. But if you do get any hospitals that have sent you the information, you've had a query on it and they act like you're a nuisance or an annoyance, please push back on that. This is why this service has been commissioned nationally, is to make sure that everything is correct and the patients are safe. So if you're asking relevant questions, ask for feedback why they're annoyed on it, and just make sure you work through that with them. The hospital teams have all been briefed. There will actually be an incentive for the hospitals to do this. So I think you'll be welcomed if you are raising relevant queries and you are looking after the patient. I don't think that will be a problem for you. I think the questions have dried up a bit there. So you've got some contact details on your screen now. That will be in there. I'm not going to answer a question around Jackie Weaver. One thing I do have to do, we're going to try this out. We've got a poll feature which gives a little bit of feedback on it. So it'd be really helpful if you spend a couple of minutes answering the questions. I will launch the poll to you now, and I'll give it a few minutes to answer it. So it'll go quiet while this happens. And if you do get questions after the event, please get in contact with your LPC whose contact details are on your screen now. So hopefully you should see a poll popping up any moment. And if you can go through and just rate from 1 to 10, where 10 is brilliant and 1 is really poor, just how useful it was and how informed you feel. So this is really helpful because it's the first time we've used this technology with a Zoom webinar. Really curious what you think of it, if it's worked well for you, if the Q&A functions worked well, all that side of things. If it's easy to use, and it's something we'll carry on using for future events. When we do the wrap up of it, the answers to these questions will be hugely valuable. There's some questions around the poll submission. If you just click on the answer for each one, it should let you do it. And then when you scroll to the bottom, that's fine. So you don't need to submit it. Once you've clicked on it, it'll appear. What I'll do at the end, I'll end it and I'll show you the results so you guys can see what you've clicked on and can see what the overall audience thought about it.
For those of you who can't submit, it might just be because on my screen, it looks like it's just one question. So I try clicking on an answer and it wouldn't press submit. But then, as Adam's said then, scroll down, there's questions 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you may just be like me and not realize that there was more than one question on the form.
For the guys that are saying they can't submit, until you've answered all, as Matt said, until you've answered all 6, it won't let you. But we are seeing those coming through. So all of the people that are saying the submit doesn't seem to be working, we're seeing you answered some of them. So it is operating as it should be. The DMS tracker is a thing that we've developed as a group of LPCs. So that'll be on the LPC's website before Monday indeed. Well, I'll give it a couple of minutes. I think we've had about 80% of people that have submitted the poll so far. So if you've done it, Brill, and I'll show you the results so you can have a look and see what you think. The last question, if there are any further comments, please chuck them in the chat, put them to all panelists and put them on there, or separately feed them back to your LPCs, whichever you feel more comfortable doing. So if there's anything about future events, then we'll bear that in mind. So there's a few questions coming through. Would anyone like to take those? So there's one on who in the trust would make the referral, the ward pharmacist, the doctor, the nurse, and who do you engage with the trusts?
Normally in the trusts, the consent for the referral is often gained in the clerking in process by the pharmacy team. So once whoever presses the button to discharge the patient, because the pharmacy team have gained that consent at the start, that then gains consent for you to then provide this service to them. Because I know there was a question about consent in one of the questions as well. So it would be the pharmacy team that, engage the patient on this service, but it could be any clinician that actually presses the discharge button. If you've got any queries about a discharge, you contact the contact details at the bottom of the discharge information. So there should be a name contact or phone number for the pharmacy in the hospital, and it's nearly always the pharmacy that you would be contacting if there was a query. It normally goes through into the main dispensary, and you speak to a technician or one of the pharmacists, who are usually very, very pleasant and will help to answer your queries. Or if they can't, they'll get back to you whenever they can.
Right.
Or if need be, you may have information in the discharge about the ward as well. But as Matt says, often they will go back to the ward or to the ward pharmacist and then get them to give you a ring back. But it's part of the minimum data set as well that there is there are contact details for a clinician on the referral.
Question from Jill around, do we hold lists of the PCN pharmacists that we can share out? We don't, is a very short answer, and if we did, we would have to gain individual consent to share that out, which we don't have. However, I would encourage every pharmacy, if you're working in a particular area, make sure you know who the local PCN pharmacists are. That's the crucial thing about it, in building a relationship up with them. I'm going to end the polling and attempt to share the results. So let's see if this works. So hopefully you can see that. So how useful this event was. Towards the high side, which is good. So that's some really good feedback for us. I don't know what you can see. I'm presuming you see my scroll through of it.
Yep.
Well, so that's largely just under half of you thought it was 10 out of 10, which is phenomenal feedback. So thank you, it's worked. The technology worked okay. Again, that was really strong results. Anyone who's struggled, we'd be really interested to know what's been the problem and what the experience has been. So please feel free to feed into your LPC anonymously, and we'll include it on the wrap up.
Adam, I think the delegates have to scroll down themselves to see the answers. We're not seeing you scrolling down.
Oh, right, okay.
But I can scroll down myself.
Fair enough, so you can scroll down and have a look. I'll do a very quick summary. So how prepared were you for DMS before this event? Large spread, sort of hovering around 8 out of 10, but small spikes there, and it goes significantly up when it's how prepared you are after. So we've made an effect there, which is good. So it's been a good investment of our time on behalf of you all to do that. In terms of supported by the LPC, there's some very high scores there, so thank you. There are also some very low scores there, so I think we'd be really interested to know how we can do better. To those people who've rated us like that, please feed back to us. We will take all constructive criticism necessary, and that'd be really fascinating. There's not a massive amount of people who said they've got future ideas. If you do have them, make sure you feed that back to us, because that's how we improve, is the feedback from you guys attending and knowing how we can do better. So thank you very much for that. We'll get a report from that. We won't see who's voted once, who voted what. It's an anonymous report, but it's really helpful for us to measure how successful such an event would be. I think I'm going to draw it to a close there. We said we'd get you out by 9 o'clock so you can enjoy what's left of your evening. So I will wish you good night and thank you very much for coming along. As I said, just stress if there's anything else you want support of, get in contact with us and we'll make sure we develop that for next time round. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for all the people who are involved in the preparation of this. This is all of the LPC teams across Cheshire and Mersey who put a lot of hard work into that. And I think it's worked very, very good. So thank you all, and thank you for the feedback around the low scores that's come in through the chat. That's helpful that someone's got confused, so it's not all bad news. Good night, everyone.